The dust kicked up around Rebecca Bradford's worn boots as she stumbled through the sleepy town of Sierra Hills, California. Her father was dead, and everything she had ever known was buried in the wreckage of a stagecoach accident. Alone and broken, Rebecca pressed her back against a wooden post outside the general store. Her throat burned with exhaustion, and the world around her swam in a haze. As the heat of the afternoon sun beat down, she fought to stay conscious. And then, through the fog, a deep voice cut through the silence. "Ma'am, are you all right?" She looked up. The man was tall, with broad shoulders and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. His face was rugged and kind, worn by years of hard work under the sun. He wore faded chaps over worn denim, a simple cotton shirt, and a hat that had seen better days. His gaze was steady and full of concern. Rebecca swallowed, trying to summon the strength to speak, but the words caught in her throat, too dry, too cracked. She just nodded, barely able to keep herself upright. "I don't think you are," he said gently. He crouched down, keeping a respectful distance, his weathered hand reaching out to her, but he stopped before touching her. "Name's Fletcher Evans. I work at the ranch just outside town. When's the last time you had water?" Rebecca tried to remember. Her mind was as foggy as her body. Water. When had she last had a drink? Days ago, maybe. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice strained. Fletcher didn't hesitate. He turned his head and called to someone inside the store. "Tommy, bring some water. Quick." He looked back at her, his face softening. "Let's get you somewhere you can rest." Rebecca wanted to refuse, wanted to hold on to what little dignity she had left, but her legs felt like they might give out any moment, and the thought of collapsing right there in the street was too much. She couldn't even muster the strength to shake her head. Fletcher stood and gently helped her to her feet. The world spun. She leaned on him, her body too tired to resist. He didn't let her fall, though. His arm slid around her waist, holding her steady as they took slow steps toward the boarding house down the street. People passed them by, some stopping to glance, others whispering. A woman walking alone, a woman who looked like she had lost everything. It wasn't an unfamiliar sight in a town like this, but something about Rebecca seemed to draw more attention than most. "I don't have any money," she murmured, feeling the sting of shame on her cheeks. The accident had taken everything, her father's savings, their plans, the future they had dreamed of. Fletcher didn't seem to care. "Don't worry about that right now," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Let's just get you somewhere safe." They reached the boarding house, a simple two-story structure with a wide porch and curtained windows. Fletcher knocked at the door, and within moments a plump woman in her 50s appeared. Her gray hair was tied back neatly, and her eyes, though stern, had a soft edge to them. "Fletcher Evans, what have you brought to my doorstep?" she asked, her tone playful but with a hint of concern. "Found her collapsed outside the store," he said, his voice steady. "Mrs. Patterson, she needs a place to rest and recover." The woman looked at Rebecca, studying her for a long moment, her eyes narrowing, before she gave a sharp nod. "Bring her in. Third room on the left upstairs." She turned to Fletcher. "You stay downstairs while I get her settled." "Yes, madam," Fletcher replied, giving her a small bow before following her inside. The room was small but clean, with a bed covered by a handmade quilt, a washstand, and a small wardrobe. Mrs. Patterson gently helped Rebecca out of her filthy dress, replacing it with a soft nightgown. She didn't speak much as she worked, but her actions were kind, efficient. "You've had a long journey, haven't you, dear?" Mrs. Patterson asked softly, as she helped Rebecca settle into the bed, her hands steady but gentle. "Where did you come from?" "Missouri," Rebecca whispered. "My father and I were heading west. There was an accident with the stagecoach. He didn't survive." Mrs. Patterson's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm so sorry for your loss." She paused, her hands folding Rebecca's clothes carefully. "Do you have any other family?" Rebecca swallowed, and the words felt like stones in her chest. "No, he was all I had." The old woman's face showed nothing but kindness. "Rest now," she said, pulling the quilt over Rebecca's body. "You've been through too much. We'll sort things out once you're stronger." As Mrs. Patterson left the room, she placed a small cup of water on the bedside table. Rebecca stared at it, the clear liquid gleaming in the dim light. She reached for it with trembling hands, her fingers aching, but the moment the cool water touched her lips, it felt like salvation. She took a few slow sips, each one bringing a small measure of strength back into her body. And, as the darkness of exhaustion claimed her, the last thought she had before slipping into a dreamless sleep was that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she'd believed. The next morning, Rebecca woke to the soft glow of dawn filtering through the curtains. Her body felt like it had been put through the ringer, every muscle aching. But there was something different now. The weight in her chest had lightened, just a little, as if the promise of safety had begun to work its magic. The water Mrs. Patterson had left on the bedside table was nearly gone, and a small tray of food had been placed beside her: bread, cheese, and a glass of milk. Her stomach rumbled loudly at the sight of it. She hadn't eaten properly in days. She sat up slowly, the sheets rustling around her. A steady thrum of nervousness gnawed at her as she reached for the bread, breaking off a piece. The food tasted bland and dry in her mouth, but she ate it anyway, desperate to regain some strength. By the time she finished, the day had fully arrived. The sounds of the town filtered through the window. The murmur of voices, the creak of wagon wheels on the dusty road. Rebecca got to her feet, the small wooden chair by the window, creaking under her weight. She steadied herself, still feeling unsteady, but the haze in her mind was starting to lift. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," Rebecca said, her voice still rough. Mrs. Patterson entered, carrying a bundle of clean clothes in her arms. She set them down on the bed and gave Rebecca a kindly smile. "You're looking better already. How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you," Rebecca said, managing a weak smile. Mrs. Patterson studied her for a moment before nodding. "I've got a clean dress for you to wear, and some undergarments. They're second-hand, but they'll do for now. If you're feeling up to it, I think it's time we get you out of that room for a while. Some fresh air will do you good." Rebecca hesitated, the thought of venturing out into the world again both daunting and necessary. Her heart ached at the thought of seeing people, seeing strangers who would look at her with pity or suspicion. But she couldn't stay locked away forever, could she? With a deep breath, she nodded. "Thank you, I'll get dressed." Mrs. Patterson gave her a brief nod and left the room, closing the door quietly behind her. As Rebecca dressed, she couldn't help but notice how the small, simple clothes made her feel a little more like herself. The dress, though loose, felt comfortable. The soft fabric, a small reminder that not everything in the world was as harsh as the past few days had been. She braided her hair, pulling it back tightly, and did her best to smooth the wrinkles from her clothes. She needed to appear stronger than she felt, if only for a moment. When she stepped downstairs, Mrs. Patterson was in the parlor, knitting by lamplight. She looked up with a pleased smile when Rebecca appeared. "You're looking more like yourself already," Mrs. Patterson said warmly. "Fletcher Evans was by earlier. He left word that when you're feeling up to it, there might be some work available for you at the ranch." Rebecca's heart skipped a beat. Fletcher, the man who had found her broken and helped her when she had no one else. "Work?" Rebecca asked, surprised. "What kind of work?" "Fletcher's boss, Mrs. Douglas, needs some help around the house," Mrs. Patterson explained. "It's nothing too demanding, just some light chores. Cooking, cleaning, maybe mending some clothes. Fletcher spoke highly of you, said you were a hard worker." Rebecca's thoughts whirled. She needed work, needed to keep busy, but the idea of working for the man who had already shown her so much kindness felt strange. She couldn't depend on him forever, could she? Before she could voice her hesitation, Mrs. Patterson added, "I can tell you've been through a lot, dear, but this could be a good opportunity. And don't worry about anything for now. Fletcher's already paid for 2 weeks of room and board. Just focus on getting back on your feet." Rebecca opened her mouth to thank her, but the words caught in her throat. How could she express the gratitude she felt? How could she say thank you for a kindness that had already begun to change everything? Instead, she simply nodded. "I'll go if you think it's a good idea. Mrs. Patterson smiled, clearly pleased with her response. "Of course, dear. You go when you're ready." Quote. Later that afternoon, Fletcher arrived at the boarding house, his presence as reassuring as it had been the day before. He was as unassuming as ever, his rough hands brushing against his worn hat as he greeted Mrs. Patterson before turning to Rebecca. "You feel up to it?" he asked, his voice quiet but strong. He looked at her as if she were just another part of the world he cared for. Rebecca felt a wave of warmth at his kindness, and despite the embarrassment creeping up her neck, she managed a nod. "Yes, thank you. I'm ready." Fletcher's expression softened. He held out his arm to her, an unspoken offer to help her if she needed it. She hesitated for a moment, her pride wanting to refuse, but then took his arm, letting him guide her out the door. The day was warm, and the air smelled faintly of pine and dust. As they walked toward the wagon waiting by the side of the street, Rebecca couldn't help but feel the weight of the world pressing down on her once again. But Fletcher's steady presence next to her gave her a small sense of peace, and for the first time since the accident, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things would get better. They climbed into the wagon, and Fletcher gave her a reassuring glance before snapping the reins. "It's a little ways out of town," he said, as the horses began to move. "Not too far. Mr. Douglas runs a good operation, good land, good cattle." As they drove, Rebecca kept her eyes on the road ahead, listening to Fletcher as he spoke about the ranch and its people. She found comfort in his steady voice, in the way he spoke so matter-of-factly, as though he had no idea how much he was healing her, simply by being there. And as the town faded behind them, Rebecca realized something. Maybe she hadn't completely lost everything. Not yet. Not if there were still people like Fletcher in the world. People who gave without asking for anything in return. The ride to the ranch was peaceful, though the quiet felt heavy, like the weight of unsaid words between them. The wagon wheels creaked against the rutted dirt road, and the horses' hooves beat a steady rhythm. Rebecca tried to focus on the motion, the simple distraction of the landscape passing by, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the life she had left behind, the one she had never imagined losing. She could still see her father's face in her mind's eye, his calm expression, his strong hands that had built the small life they'd shared. That life was gone now, torn apart in an instant, and yet, as they moved farther from town, further from her pain, there was a flicker of something else, something like hope. Fletcher didn't talk much, but his presence was comforting. He kept the horses moving steadily, and every once in a while, he'd glance over at her with an unreadable expression. His silence wasn't uncomfortable, though, just respectful. He didn't ask her about the things she didn't want to talk about, didn't pry into her grief. It was the first time in days that Rebecca felt like she could breathe again, even if just a little. They finally reached the ranch, and Rebecca couldn't help but feel awe at the sight. The place was sprawling, more land than she had ever imagined. The main house, a large two-story structure, stood proudly at the center, with barns and outbuildings scattered around it. There were corrals full of horses, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance. The smell of the land, the rich, earthy scent of the pasture, was a stark contrast to the smell of dust and death she had carried with her from Missouri. "This is where I work," Fletcher said, breaking the silence as he guided the wagon up to the barn. "Mr. Douglas owns the place. He's a good man, hard on work, but fair." Rebecca took in the scene, trying not to be overwhelmed by the scale of it all. "It's beautiful here," she said quietly. Fletcher gave her a small, encouraging smile. "It's a good place to be. You'll see. Mrs. Douglas is a fine woman. If she hires you, she'll treat you well." As they pulled up to the barn, a tall woman with graying hair and a no-nonsense demeanor stepped out onto the porch. Her sharp eyes took in Rebecca in a glance, but her expression softened when she spoke. "Fletcher, you bring me a stranger?" she asked, though her voice lacked any real harshness. "This is Rebecca Bradford," Fletcher explained, hopping down from the wagon. "She's been through a rough time, Mrs. Douglas. She needs work, and I thought you might be able to help." Mrs. Douglas gave him a thoughtful look before turning her attention back to Rebecca. "Is that so?" she said. "Well, come inside then. We'll see what we can do." Rebecca followed them into the house, her heart pounding. She couldn't help but feel out of place here, in this new world of ranches and wide open spaces. The air inside the house was cool, the scent of freshly baked bread mixing with the faint smell of wood smoke. Mrs. Douglas led them into a sitting room, where she gestured for Rebecca to sit. "Tell me your story, then," Mrs. Douglas said, her tone blunt but not unkind. Rebecca hesitated, her fingers twisting together in her lap. The weight of the past few days was still pressing on her chest, making it hard to speak. But she couldn't sit in silence forever. "I lost my father," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We were headed west, looking for a new start. There was a stagecoach accident. He didn't survive." Mrs. Douglas didn't interrupt, just watched her with those keen eyes. "And you came all the way here alone?" Rebecca nodded, swallowing hard. "I had no choice. I don't know what else to do." A long silence stretched between them. Mrs. Douglas studied her for a moment before speaking again, her voice gentler now. "You've got courage coming out here like this. A lot of people would have turned back. It's not easy, but if you're willing to work, we'll find a place for you here." Rebecca's heart gave a small leap. "You mean it, quote?" Mrs. Douglas nodded. "I do. Now, I'll show you around the house, and we'll get you started. You'll need to keep up, but if you're strong, we'll make it work." Fletcher stepped forward then, giving Rebecca a small nod. "You're going to do fine. Just take it one step at a time." As the days passed, Rebecca began to find her rhythm at the ranch. Mrs. Douglas had given her small tasks at first, washing dishes, helping with the laundry, mending clothes. And as she grew stronger, the work became more demanding. But it wasn't the labor that was wearing her down. It was the quiet moments between tasks, the moments when she'd catch herself thinking of her father and the life they had dreamed of. Those moments would catch her off guard, and she'd have to fight to push the grief back down. She saw Fletcher often, working with the horses or tending to the cattle. He never spoke much, but his kindness was a steady presence in the background of her days. He'd check in on her after work, his concerned eyes watching her closely, making sure she wasn't overdoing it. One evening, after a long day of work, Rebecca sat outside on the porch of the main house, the sun sinking low in the sky. The orange and pink light reflected off the hills, casting long shadows over the land. Fletcher walked out and joined her, sitting down beside her without a word. They sat there in silence for a while, just listening to the soft rustling of the trees and the occasional neigh of a horse in the distance. "I don't know how to thank you," Rebecca said, her voice quiet. "You don't have to thank me," Fletcher replied, his voice soft but steady. "I just did what anyone would have done. Sometimes we all need help. There's no shame in that." Rebecca's heart twisted in her chest. He had no idea how much that meant to her. She had always prided herself on standing on her own, but now she was learning, slowly, that there was strength in letting others in. There was power in accepting help, in allowing herself to heal. "I don't know how to let people in," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I've been alone for so long." Fletcher glanced over at her, his gaze steady. "It's not easy, but sometimes letting someone else in can help you heal in ways you never thought possible." Rebecca didn't respond immediately. Instead, she let his words settle into her chest. For the first time in days, she didn't feel completely lost. Maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to find her way again. The weeks passed in a quiet rhythm, and with each passing day, Rebecca felt herself regaining a bit of the strength she had lost. The ranch became a place of routine, a place where she could lose herself in the work without being overwhelmed by the weight of her grief. Mrs. Douglas was a stern but fair employer, and the tasks she assigned Rebecca were demanding, but they gave her a sense of purpose again. It wasn't easy, of course. The mornings were early, and the days were long. Rebecca worked alongside Mrs. Douglas, cleaning the house, tending to the kitchen, and helping prepare meals for the ranch hands. The nights were the hardest, though, when she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and feeling the emptiness creep in. But each day, little by little, the pain became a bit more manageable. Each day, she grew a little stronger. She began to feel like she had a place here, like maybe, just maybe, she could start anew. One afternoon, after a long day of cleaning the stables, Rebecca was sitting on the porch, sipping a glass of water, when Fletcher approached her. He was covered in dust, his shirt soaked with sweat from the hot afternoon sun, but his smile was warm. "You look like you're getting stronger," he said, his voice low but filled with quiet approval. He had been checking in on her regularly, making sure she wasn't overdoing it, always watching from a distance but never smothering her. "I feel stronger," Rebecca replied, a little surprised by the honesty in her words. "I think I'm finally starting to get the hang of things." Fletcher took a seat beside her on the porch, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. The evening air was beginning to cool, and the ranch, bathed in golden light, looked peaceful. He glanced at her sideways, his gaze thoughtful. "I'm glad to hear it," he said after a beat. "You've been through a lot, more than most people could handle. But you've kept going, Rebecca. That's something." Rebecca's chest tightened at his words. He had no idea just how much it meant to hear him say that. Fletcher, in his quiet way, had become her anchor. In the beginning, she had tried to keep her distance, afraid that trusting anyone again would just lead to more pain. But with him, it felt different. "I don't know what I would have done without you," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Fletcher's eyes softened, and for a moment there was a long, comfortable silence between them. "You'd have figured it out," he said gently. "You're strong, Rebecca. You just needed someone to remind you of it." Rebecca didn't say anything. She simply leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a moment, and allowing herself to simply be, to feel the cool breeze on her skin, to hear the sounds of the ranch settling into the night. The sound of hooves approaching interrupted her thoughts, and Rebecca opened her eyes to see a rider coming toward the porch. It was one of the ranch hands, a young man named Peter, with a grin on his face as he rode his horse up to them. "Evening, Fletcher. Evening, Miss Bradford." Peter greeted them cheerfully, tipping his hat in her direction. "Mr. Douglas sent me to tell you he's got a few more cattle he wants moved to the west pasture tomorrow. Thought I'd give you a heads up." "Thanks, Peter," Fletcher replied, standing up and brushing the dirt off his trousers. "We'll be ready." Peter nodded and glanced at Rebecca with a mischievous grin. "You planning to help tomorrow, Miss Bradford? I hear you've got quite a knack for the hard work around here." Rebecca chuckled, surprised at the lightness in her own voice. "I'll be ready for whatever Mrs. Douglas needs me to do. I can't promise I'll be much help with cattle, though." Peter laughed, his eyes twinkling with humor. "Fair enough. If you change your mind, just let me know." With that, he gave them both a wave and rode off toward the barn, his horse kicking up dust as he disappeared into the distance. Rebecca turned her attention back to Fletcher, who was still standing beside her, his hand resting lightly on the back of his chair. There was a slight tension in his posture, as if he were holding something back. "What's on your mind?" she asked, sensing the shift in his mood. Fletcher hesitated for a moment before speaking, his voice lower now, more serious. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about everything you've been through, about how hard it must be, just getting by." Rebecca met his gaze, her heart thudding a little harder. She knew what he was getting at. He had been helping her, supporting her, but there was something in his eyes now that made her wonder if he wanted to say something more. "I don't know if I'm ready to talk about all of it yet," she said quietly, the words escaping before she could stop them. She had been keeping so much inside, locking away the grief and the fear that threatened to undo everything. But the quiet strength in Fletcher's eyes made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could start opening up. Fletcher nodded, his expression softening. "I understand. I'm not asking you to talk about anything you're not ready for." He paused, his gaze turning away for a moment as if he were gathering his thoughts. "But I want you to know, Rebecca, that whatever you're carrying, whatever burden you think you have to bear on your own, I'm here, and I'll stay here, no matter what." Rebecca's heart skipped a beat at his words. He had no idea what he was offering, how much it meant for someone to simply be there. She hadn't realized how much she needed that until now. "Thank you," she whispered, barely able to speak for the emotion clogging her throat. "That means more than you'll ever know." Fletcher met her gaze, his eyes steady, full of understanding. Then, without a word, he sat back down beside her on the porch, and together they watched the sun dip below the horizon, the sky streaked with pink and purple. It was a quiet moment, but in that silence, Rebecca felt a small shift within herself. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as broken as she thought. Maybe, with time, she could heal. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to do it alone. The days began to blur together, each one a quiet rhythm of work, rest, and the occasional conversation with Fletcher. Rebecca found herself becoming more accustomed to the pace of life at the ranch, and the peace it brought her was something she hadn't realized she'd been longing for. Mrs. Douglas was kind but no nonsense, and she treated Rebecca like one of her own, offering gentle guidance without being overbearing. The ranch hands were respectful, and even Peter's playful banter no longer felt like an intrusion. Still, there were moments when the weight of her past would come rushing back, unexpected and overwhelming. It happened in the middle of the night when the house was quiet, or when she stood at the edge of the pasture and saw the distant hills that seemed to stretch on forever. Her father's absence was a shadow that followed her, always there, lurking just beneath the surface. One afternoon, after a long day of work in the kitchen, Rebecca was walking back to the main house when she noticed Fletcher standing by the stables, talking to one of the younger ranch hands. The wind had picked up, sending dust swirling through the air, and Fletcher was pulling his hat down tighter to shield his eyes from the gusts. Rebecca paused, watching him for a moment. There was something about the way he carried himself, something grounded, like he had been shaped by the land itself. As if sensing her gaze, Fletcher turned and saw her standing there. He waved, his smile easy and warm. "You need anything, Rebecca?" he called out. She smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "I'm just heading inside to finish up," she called, though she found herself wishing for another moment with him. They had spent so many quiet hours together already, but she couldn't deny that there was a comfort in his presence. "All right," he said, giving her a small nod. "I'll be in soon to finish up with the horses." Rebecca turned to head back toward the house, but as she did, a familiar voice called her name. "Miss Bradford!" Peter's voice was loud and teasing, and Rebecca turned to see him walking toward her, his grin wide. "I've got a question for you," quote. She sighed, but couldn't help but laugh at the playful look in his eyes. "What is it, Peter?" "You've been here a while now," he said, his tone light. "And I've been meaning to ask, how is it that you've never ridden a horse? I figured if anyone could handle it, it'd be you." Rebecca froze, her mind flashing to the many days she had watched Fletcher work with the horses, his hands gentle as he trained them, guiding them like they were old friends. The thought of getting on one of those animals sent a flutter of nerves through her stomach. It had been years since she'd ridden, and even then, it had been nothing more than a childhood memory. I haven't ridden in a long time," she admitted, feeling a heat rise in her cheeks. Peter raised an eyebrow. "That's a shame," he said, his grin widening. "I'll tell you what, Miss Bradford, you ride a horse with me, and I'll go easy on you the next time we're working together. Deal?" Rebecca hesitated, but there was something about his challenge that made her want to take it. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, like he was daring her to step outside her comfort zone. Or maybe it was the thought of proving to herself that she wasn't as fragile as she felt. "All right," she said after a beat, her voice firm, "but don't go easy on me. I'll do my best." Peter's grin stretched even wider. "That's the spirit! Meet me at the stables in 10 minutes, and we'll get you set up." When Rebecca arrived at the stables, Peter was already there, leading a horse out into the open. She walked toward him, her heart beating faster than she liked to admit. The horse was a sturdy bay, its dark coat gleaming in the sunlight. Peter held the reins loosely, waiting for her. "Her name's Rosie," Peter said. "She's a gentle one. I thought she'd be a good match for you." Rebecca nodded, trying to steady her breathing. She had ridden when she was younger, but it felt like a lifetime ago. Still, she had made a promise to herself, to not let fear keep her from moving forward. Peter helped her mount, offering her a hand as she carefully swung her leg over the horse's back. The moment she was seated, she felt the horse's movements beneath her, steady, rhythmic. It was a familiar feeling, but it made her heart race nonetheless. "All right, just hold on to the reins loosely," Peter instructed, walking alongside her. "Rosie knows what she's doing. Just relax and trust her." Rebecca nodded, her hands shaking slightly as she gripped the reins. Her legs felt stiff, unsure, but as she relaxed into the saddle, the familiar rhythm of the horse's movements began to settle her. The sun was warm on her face, and the ranch stretched out before her, endless and peaceful. For the first time since she arrived, Rebecca felt like she could breathe without fear. She could feel the wind on her face, the gentle rocking of the horse beneath her, and in that moment, it was as if the weight of everything that had happened over the past few months had lifted just a little. She glanced over at Peter, who was still walking alongside her. He gave her an encouraging smile. "How's it feel?" Rebecca took a deep breath, feeling a slow smile tug at her lips. "It feels good," she said, her voice steady. "Better than I expected." Peter's grin grew wider, but he didn't tease her. Instead, he slowed his pace and walked a little further back, allowing her the space to ride on her own. For a while, Rebecca simply rode in silence, feeling the calm of the land settle deep in her bones. It was the first time in a long time that she didn't feel like she was constantly chasing something, trying to outrun her own grief. As they rode back toward the stables, Rebecca's thoughts shifted to Fletcher. He had been a constant in her life since she had arrived here, steady and patient. He never pushed her to move faster than she could, never asked her to share more than she was ready to. His quiet strength had been a lifeline, and somewhere deep inside, Rebecca knew that it wasn't just his help that had been healing her, it was his belief in her. When they returned to the barn, Rebecca dismounted, her legs a little unsteady but her heart full. Peter patted Rosie's neck, his grin still in place. "You did great, Miss Bradford," he said. "Next time, we'll see if you can beat me at a race." Rebecca laughed, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. "We'll see about that." As she walked back toward the house, her mind was already turning over the day's events. She was healing, little by little. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to face what came next. The days that followed Rebecca's ride with Peter were some of the most peaceful she had experienced since she arrived at the ranch. The work continued, of course. There were always chores to do, meals to prepare, and cattle to tend to. But somehow, each task felt lighter now. She had found a rhythm, and with it, a sense of peace she hadn't realized she was capable of. But more than that, there was something new stirring inside her. It was the quiet but persistent feeling that maybe, just maybe, she was starting to come alive again. The routine was comforting. She would wake before dawn, helping Mrs. Douglas prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, and then spend the day working with Mrs. Douglas or tending to the kitchen. At night, she would sit on the porch with Fletcher, watching the stars appear in the clear sky. It was during these quiet moments that the walls she had built around herself began to crumble, brick by brick. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Fletcher joined her on the porch. He was holding 2 glasses of lemonade, the cool liquid a welcome relief after a long day in the heat. "Thought you might need this," he said softly, handing her a glass. "Thank you," Rebecca replied, her fingers brushing his as she took it. The contact sent a small spark of warmth through her, and she looked up at him, feeling something stir deep in her chest. Fletcher sat down beside her, his long legs stretched out in front of him as he settled into the rocking chair next to hers. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the soft creak of the chairs mingling with the distant sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Finally, Fletcher spoke, his voice low as though weighing each word before he said it. "I've been thinking about something," he began, turning to face her. Rebecca looked at him, the cool glass of lemonade still resting in her hands. "What about?" Fletcher hesitated for a moment before answering. "About you. About us." Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. She had known that Fletcher cared for her, had felt it in the quiet, unspoken ways he had supported her since she arrived. But hearing him say it aloud felt like a leap into the unknown. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I don't know if I can ever be ready. I've lost so much. I've been so alone for so long." Fletcher's gaze softened, and he reached out, gently touching her hand. His touch was warm, steady. "You don't have to be ready all at once," he said softly. "You don't have to carry everything on your own. I'm here, Rebecca. I've been here from the start, and I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to do this alone." The words he spoke wrapped around her like a blanket, and for the first time in months, Rebecca let herself relax, let herself feel the weight of his words. It wasn't about being fixed or healing instantly. It was about being seen, being held, even in her brokenness. "I'm scared," she confessed, her voice trembling. "I'm scared that if I let myself believe in something again, I'll lose it, that it will all slip away like everything else has." Fletcher didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood and walked to the edge of the porch, staring out over the ranch. Rebecca watched him, her heart beating in time with the rhythm of the crickets and the evening breeze. When he turned back to face her, there was a quiet determination in his eyes. "Nothing lasts forever," he said, his voice steady. "But I can promise you this. If you give me your trust, if you let me be part of your life, I'll make sure it's worth the risk. I'll be here, every day. Not because I think I can fix you, but because I believe in you. I believe in what we can build together." Rebecca's chest tightened as the depth of his words settled over her. She didn't know if she was ready to love again. Not fully, not yet, but the tenderness in Fletcher's voice, the strength in his presence, made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, she could take that first step. "I don't know if I can promise anything right now," she said softly, looking up at him with a mixture of uncertainty and hope. "But I can promise to try. To let you in, even if it's just a little at a time." Fletcher smiled, a small, soft curve of his lips that made something in Rebecca's heart flutter. "That's all I ask," he said, his voice full of quiet conviction. "We'll take it one day at a time." Rebecca nodded, feeling something shift inside her. A subtle, steady shift that made her believe in the possibility of tomorrow, of a future she hadn't thought she'd have. The stars above them began to twinkle, faint at first, but growing stronger as the night deepened. Fletcher reached out, taking her hand in his once again, and for the first time in a long time, Rebecca allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't broken after all. Maybe she was just waiting for someone to help her heal. And maybe, in the quiet strength of this place, with Fletcher at her side, she could find the peace she had been searching for.